Imagine discovering that Lucifer's rebellion didn't end when he fell. She just changed places. The Bible says there was a war in heaven. Angels were dragged. Spiritual authorities broke down. A third followed the path of rebellion. But the question that almost no one asks is, what happened to them afterwards? Because they didn't all suffer the same fate. Some were arrested, others remained free, and others seem to be awaiting a judgment that has not yet arrived. This means that the fall was not just an ancient, distant event, lost in difficult-to-understand pages. It was the beginning of an invisible division that still echoes, a separation between faithful angels and fallen angels, between those who remained before God and those who chose to follow pride. But there is one detail. When Revelation talks about a third of the stars being swept away, many people read too quickly. And when Jude mentions angels kept in eternal prisons, almost no one stops to imagine the weight of this. What type of rebellion was so severe that some spiritual beings had to be chained? And if not everyone was arrested, where are the others? In this video, we will delve into this mystery, the fate of the angels who followed Lucifer, who was imprisoned, who remained active, how there is a hierarchy among the fallen, what the abyss is, and why there is still a future judgment waiting for them. And this is where it all starts to get unsettling. Because this is not just a story about the past. It's about a war that started in heaven, but whose consequences still affect the earth. And perhaps the scariest part is realizing that their fall revealed something many ignore. Not every rebellion ends the moment it begins. There is something strange about the expression 1/3, because it doesn't appear as a small detail. It appears as a rupture mark. Revelation 12 speaks of a third of the stars being swept away. And traditionally, many understand these stars to refer to the angels who followed the rebellion. But think about it for a second. If it was a third, then it wasn't an isolated drop. It wasn't just Lucifer alone. It was a crowd. And this is where the central question arises. How could beings who stood before the glory of God choose rebellion? But there is an even more disturbing detail. The Bible does not place all of these angels in the same place after the fall. Jude speaks of angels kept in eternal prisons. However, in other texts, we see evil spiritual forces still at work. So, who was arrested? Who remained free? And why does this difference exist? This is the point that opens the mystery. Because the fate of fallen angels seems to have levels. Some received immediate restrictions, others remain in activity. And everyone is heading towards a final judgment that has yet to be fully revealed. What almost no one realizes is that 1/3 doesn't just show quantity, shows scale. It shows that the rebellion was organized, deep, dangerous, and perhaps much bigger than our minds can imagine. Because when a part of heaven turns against God, the entire universe feels the impact. And the question that remains is simple, but heavy. What did they do after falling? And then a sentence appears that changes the tone of everything. Jude speaks of angels who did not keep their original position. They abandoned the place that belonged to them, and because of this, they were kept in eternal prisons, in darkness, until the judgment of the great day. Realize the weight of this. It's not just they fell, it's they were arrested. And not in an ordinary prison, not in a physical place as we imagine. The image is deeper, restriction, darkness, waiting, judgment. But why were some chained? What was it about this part of the rebellion that required such severe punishment? Here begins an important division. Not all fallen angels seem to be in the same condition. Some are prevented from acting freely. They are detained, separated, as if they had crossed a limit that they could not surpass. And that creates enormous tension, because if there are fallen angels trapped, then there is a story within a story. There is a layer that has not been fully opened to us. The Bible shows enough for us to understand the danger, but it does not reveal all the details at once. And perhaps that is precisely what makes the topic so unsettling. Imagine powerful beings, created to serve before God, now kept in darkness, awaiting an appointed day. They are not forgotten. They didn't escape. They are reserved. But there is one detail. Their arrest is not the end, it's a wait. And every wait points to something bigger. If these angels are already chained, why is there still a future judgment? But then comes the detail that makes everything more serious. Not everyone was arrested, because while Jude speaks of angels kept in darkness, other passages show evil spiritual forces still moving, tempting, influencing, deceiving, and resisting God's purpose. In other words, part and the rebellion is contained, but part of it still works. And this is where the past touches the present. Because if there are free fallen angels, then the fall did not stop in heaven. She descended into human history. It blended into the spiritual conflict that crosses generations. It appears as opposition, lies, pride, corruption, and resistance against everything that points to God. But understand, they do not act as equals to God. They do not have absolute control. They do not dominate the future. Their role is real, but limited. There is permission, there is a border, there is authority above them. And this changes the way we see fear, because the goal is not to imagine a world out of control. The goal is to understand that there is an invisible war going on within boundaries that God still governs. Even so, the question continues to bother. Why were some fallen arrested immediately, while others remained free for a while? Perhaps the answer lies in the type of transgression. Maybe it's in the role they played. Maybe it's something the Bible only hints at without opening up completely. And this gap is important because when the text doesn't reveal everything, it forces us to pay attention to what it reveals. There are fallen beings awaiting judgment. There are others that still operate. And there is an enemy who knows that his time is not eternal. That's why the tension increases. If they know the end is determined, why do they keep fighting? And here is something that many people ignore. The rebellion of the fallen angels does not appear to have been a formless chaos. She seems to have order, because when the Bible speaks of powers, principalities, powers, and rulers, the sensation is not of a disorganized crowd. The feeling is of a structure, a hierarchy, a spiritual system of opposition, and that makes everything more dangerous. Because a disorganized threat scares for a moment, but an organized threat endures for eons. What almost no one realizes is that the fallen did not necessarily lose all capacity for action at the moment of the fall. They lost their place, their purity, their communion, and their destiny. But they still appear as intelligent, strategic, persistent forces. They observe patterns. They exploit weaknesses. They repeat old lies with new clothes. And this is where history stops seeming distant. Because if there is hierarchy among the fallen, then there is intention, there is coordination, there is an attempt to influence, but there is one detail. Even organized, they remain essentially defeated. Their structure is not a sign of victory, it is a sign of desperate resistance. Like an army that knows the sentence has already been written, but still tries to do as much damage as possible before the end. This changes the question. It's not just what happened to the angels who followed Lucifer. The bigger question is, why do they continue to act as if there was still a chance? Perhaps because rebellion always has a central illusion, believing that it can overcome what God has already determined. And this illusion was not trapped in the sky. She still tries to repeat herself here, and then we come to a word that carries a dark weight: the abyss. It's not just a place. It's a final limit idea, a containment space, a point where the freedom of the fallen meets a barrier that they cannot break. And this is where everything gets deeper. In some passages, the abyss appears linked to prison, judgment, and spiritual forces that cannot act without permission. This shows something essential. Even the rebellious spiritual world is not free as it imagines itself to be. He is bound by decrees, bound by limits, trapped in a time that you don't control. But there is one detail that almost no one notices. The abyss doesn't scare just because it arrests. It scares because it reveals that there is a superior order even over darkness. Nothing is completely loose. Nothing escapes God's gaze. Even that which seems hidden, ancient, and dangerous is under authority. And maybe that's why certain spirits fear this place so much. Because the abyss is not just punishment, it's anticipation. It's like a closed door before the final judgment, a dark room before the full sentence, a silent warning that the rebellion may seem active now, but it will not remain that way forever. Think about it. If some fallen are already trapped and others still await the end, then the abyss points to an uncomfortable truth. There is a spiritual calendar that we do not see, a marked time, an ongoing order, a sentence that has not yet been fully executed, and that changes everything, because fallen angels are not heading towards an uncertain future. They walk to an announced destination. The question is, when that door finally closes, what will happen to everyone who is still free? But there is one point that makes this story even more urgent. The final judgment has not yet taken place. Some angels are already arrested, others still work. But they are all heading towards the same destination, God's definitive sentence. And that reveals something powerful. Lucifer's fall did not end in freedom. It ended in a countdown. From the moment of the rebellion, their future was no longer open. Defeat is not a possibility. It's a certainty, just waiting for the determined time. But there is one detail. They know that. And maybe that's why their performance seems so intense. Because anyone who knows that time is short does not act calmly, act in a hurry, with fury, with desperation. Revelation shows this idea powerfully. The enemy acts knowing he has little time. And this sentence changes everything. Because spiritual warfare is not between two balanced sides trying to figure out who wins. The voltage is in range, in not yet, in the space between the written sentence and the executed sentence. And it is exactly in this space that humanity lives. This is where decisions are made. This is where lies are spread. This is where pride continues to try to look like freedom. But the truth is deeper. every fallen angel who still acts carries future condemnation. Every rebel power that appears to move now is only within an allowable time frame. And when this period ends, there will be no new rebellion. There will be no second chance to take heaven. There will be no alternative throne. The question that remains is not whether they will be judged. The question is why God still allows this gap. And perhaps the answer will lead us to something greater than the fallen angels themselves. And this is where this story stops seeming distant, because many people look at fallen angels as if they were just ancient characters from a forgotten spiritual war. Something symbolic, something stuck in the past. But the Bible connects this rebellion to the present all the time. Connects to pride, to corruption, the lie that convinces people that they can live far from God without consequences. And that makes everything closer than it seems. Because the essence of the fall was never just power. It was independence. It was the attempt to exist without obeying the Creator. And when you look at the world today, this same logic appears everywhere. The idea that human beings can decide for themselves what is true, what is right, what is moral, what deserves worship. Do you see the connection? The rebellion that began in heaven continues to echo on earth. But there is a disturbing detail. The more the world normalizes darkness, the less people realize they are being influenced by it. And perhaps this is the most dangerous way of acting, not appearing as something scary, but as something acceptable. This is why the Bible talks so much about spiritual vigilance, not as constant fear, but as awareness, as discernment, as the ability to realize that there is a battle going on beyond what the eyes can see. And here, an uncomfortable question arises. If fallen angels still try to influence humanity, what is their true goal? Undoing? Mistake? Or something even bigger? Maybe the whole point was never just attacking people. Maybe it's pulling them away from the truth in the same way the rebellion started in the beginning. And when you understand this, the past stops being just ancient history. It turns into a warning. But there is one detail that changes the whole story. The fate of the fallen angels does not just reveal their failure, reveals the sovereignty of God. Because when we look at rebellion, it's easy to focus on the fall, the pit, the prisons, the spiritual powers, and the future judgment. But behind all this, there is a greater message. No rebellious power can escape divine control. Neither does Lucifer. Neither did the angels who followed him. Not even those who are in prison. Not even those who still work. And this is where tension turns into revelation. The rebellion seemed for a moment like an attempt to take something, but in the end, she only exposed one truth. No creature can take the place of the Creator. What almost no one realizes is that the fallen angels are not the center of this story. God is. Their fall shows the danger of pride. It shows that intelligence without submission becomes destruction. It shows that beauty without obedience turns into ruin. It shows that freedom without God ends in prison. And this directly affects humanity, because the same lie still circulates. You can live as if God is not necessary. But the end of the fallen angels silently responds, can't. Their rebellion began with a desire for elevation, but ended in fall. It began with a promise of autonomy, but ended in condemnation. It began with the appearance of power, but ended in waiting for judgment. And perhaps This is the strongest point of all. Their fate is not just punishment. It's a warning, a spiritual mirror showing what happens when creation tries to separate itself from the source of life. But there is still an open question. If celestial beings fell by rejecting God, what happens to an entire generation when they start calling rebellion freedom? And maybe that's the question this video leaves in your mind. If and those created in the presence of God could fall through pride, what can pride do within us? Because the fate of the fallen angels is not just a story about spiritual beings. It is a warning about the danger of exchanging submission for control. Light by appearance, truth by desire. They followed Lucifer by believing a false promise, and the result was fall, imprisonment, darkness, and judgment. But there is one final detail. Their story has not yet ended before our eyes. Some are in prison, others still work, and everyone is heading towards an outcome that God has already determined. So the question is not just, where did the fallen angels go? The question is, how many people are still following the same logic that brought down these angels? The same pride, the same illusion of independence, the same desire to live without God. And that's what makes this topic so serious. Because their fall reveals that evil never starts out feeling like prison. It starts out looking like freedom. But in the end, every rebellion against God takes its toll. Now I want to know, do you believe that all the fallen angels are already imprisoned, or that part of them still influences the world today? Write your opinion in the comments. And if this video opened your eyes, keep following along, because there are other spiritual mysteries that seem ancient, but perhaps are much closer than we imagine.